Hey everyone, my name is Emaan.
And my name is Danielle, and you guys are listening to our third episode of Seeing Clearly, which is our pre-clerkship guide to all things ophthalmology. On today's episode, we are going to be interviewing Dr. Jim Denstedt.
So Dr. Denstedt is a current ophthalmology resident at the University of Ottawa and is set to start his PGY2 year in July. He graduated from medical school at Western University in 2020. And in medical school, Jim pursued interest both in teaching and research. He taught prep courses for undergraduate physiology exams at Western, and prior to medical school, taught MCAT Biology for 2 years.
In terms of research, Jim works under the supervision of Dr. Cindy Hutnik, who did projects focused on modeling wound healing after glaucoma surgery in a 3D bioartificial tissue model. His work also sought to test a variety of different wound healing modulating molecules as potential candidates for adjunctive therapy with glaucoma surgery.
So outside of his professional interests, Jim is an avid musician, having played guitar since the age of 8, as well as the drums, keyboard, and bass. He led the Schulich Medicine class band with many of his medicine classmates, organizing shows and fundraising for charity. And he's been playing in a variety of bands, including rock, blues, and metal groups. Jim continues to have keen interests in peer mentorship, teaching, research, and music. And Jim didn't include this in his bio, but we're excited to share that Jim is our resident advisor for the Seeing Clearly podcast. And fun fact is that he actually is the artist behind the opening music for our podcast.
So that's been awesome. And so with all of that being said, we're so excited to introduce Dr. Jim Denstedt.
Yeah, it's great to be here and looking forward to discussing with the two of you.
Yeah, us as well. So I'm going to start off with our very first question, which is pretty open-ended as expected, but we want to know what drew you to the field of ophthalmology and whether there were any other specialties maybe you were considering while you were in medical school.
Yeah, absolutely. So before medical school and at the beginning, I had no idea what ophthalmology was, like even what the word ophthalmology meant. I had never heard of it in my life. I know that at the very beginning of medical school, I had some interest in internal medicine and cardiology, just because that was some of the areas of my undergraduate courses before medical school. But I started to learn about ophthalmology sort of towards the end of first year going into second year of medical school. And my initial interest before clinical exposure was just the actual anatomy and physiology of the eye and vision and things like this. And I just thought it was quite interesting. But what I would say is that the two real main things about ophthalmology that drew me to it and continue to have interest in are first the daily work and how it's fun and interesting, and I'll discuss that, and also the impact that you have on patients. So with regards to the daily work, I honestly just enjoy doing it. I like using slit lamps. You get to use lasers, you do different types of surgery, you use chronic medications, acute medications, lots of different ways of treating people. And I actually just found it more fun and interesting than things like rounding or sort of just clinic visits, especially using all the different technology. It was just a lot of fun. And then probably the bigger thing is the way that you actually have a very direct, intangible impact on the daily lives of patients. Vision is something that you use all the time. And it's when there's a problem with it or a change in it, it's really obvious and readily apparent. So being able to work with vision, preserve vision, and restore vision, to me is just a privilege, really. And there's no more direct and clear way that I've seen that you can really affect the daily life of the patients that you work with. So those two things together were definitely the main things that I liked about ophthalmology. And yeah, to this day, I still enjoy it. Of course, I'm still early in my training, and I look forward to continuing to work at it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's also just like nice for us to hear that even for someone who didn't know what ophthalmology was going into medical school could still find such interest in it and end up where you are now. It's incredible. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And it's cool to see too just how many different reasons and how like why the variety of reasons are for you being drawn to ophthalmology. I think it's a really interesting specialty, and some of those things you were talking about aren't really things that people think about when they think of ophthalmology. So kind of shifting gears on that note a little bit, we mentioned a bit in your bio that research was important to you in medical school. So could you mind maybe talking a little bit about what you did and maybe why you did that type of research, and whether or not research is really an important part of someone's application when they're trying to do ophthalmology?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a bit, I guess, unique in the sense that it was mostly basic science research that I did in medical school. And the way that I first got into it was there was just a research program run by Schulich with all different staff and different specialties. And the stuff that Dr. Hutnik was working on just sounded really cool and interesting. It was this, and I'll kind of describe it. It was basically a 3D bioartificial tissue model of Tenon's capsule, which is one of the anatomic layers of the eye that's thought to be important in wound healing. And they actually took samples right out of intraoperatively human samples from patients of Tenon's capsule, and then established primary cell lines with these, and then grew them in a collagen lattice. And it was kind of cool because you could see fibrosis and scarring and function of the cells, but you can also do things like PCR and Western blots and a variety of different assays. So it was very useful. So anyways, it sounded really interesting, so I got into it and I quite enjoyed it, and then I basically did that for 3 of the 4 years of medical school.
Yeah.
What I'll say about research is, so it's important for CARMs. I think I don't think you can really lie about that. So and I'll talk about why though. So I would say like research is important for more like general reasons than people think. So it generally demonstrates like work ethic, ability to do research, ability to work with others, seeing things through to the end. It's quite difficult to actually get all the way to the end to publication, and oftentimes you run into obstacles. So how do you persevere, for example? So more of like a general skill set. And then it does also show like your interest in the field. But what I'll say is that given the fact that the majority of it is like those more general things, it's not a huge deal if you don't necessarily have all ophtho research. One common thing that people say is like, it's okay if you have research in other areas, and then maybe towards the end of medical school, you start to demonstrate like more of an interest in ophtho research towards the end, even if it ends up the minority of your output on your CV. But of course, the benefit of doing it in ophtho is that you meet people, right? Like you meet the people that you do research with. And if you go to conferences, you meet other people in the field, and that really doesn't, of course, has no downside. But bottom line, I would say do what you enjoy. To me, basic science was enjoyable, despite the fact that it's harder to have. Well, it just depends on who you ask, but it's hard to have good metrics of output in basic science because a lot of the stuff takes really long, and you go back to square one pretty often. So in spite of the fact that I didn't have like a high metric of output, I enjoyed it enough and I took ownership of it enough that I could just blabber on about it in interviews and like talk at length about new ideas that I have or how I design experiments. And I think that was appreciated. So definitely do what you enjoy and just view it that way. And I think that will be fruitful.
I mean, thanks for the advice, because I think most medical students, at all stages in med school are wondering about that. So that really helps out for me personally. I'm sure Danielle and our listeners.
Yeah, like I mentioned, like a lot of it is just you have to do research in residency, right? So they like to see that you have those skills, and then it also shows like work ethic and perseverance. So the more kind of general things about it, I think, are valued for sure.
Yeah, makes sense.
And honestly, just speaking personally, it's like it helps a lot with time management when you can focus on school and in clinic, but you have these other projects and research going on. So you're really like putting and allocating your time in the right direction. So thank you for that. And now, kind of on the same note, I was wondering if you have any advice for medical students who are interested in ophthalmology, maybe like in terms of not just in pre-clerkship, but also speaking about what it means to be a good clerk and stand out on clinical rotations within ophthalmology?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So um, I always make two sort of like general points, and then I'll sort of say some specific things. So the first thing is there's some things that you can control and other things that you can't. So you can't control like how the algorithm works or things like this, right? But you can control working on your CV, doing things that you enjoy, trying your best on clinical rotations. So focus on what you can control is the first thing. And then the second thing is you should view this as more of a marathon than a sprint. A lot of people think that they need to get a lot of stuff done quickly and early, but you actually have more time than you think. And if you burn yourself out early, then that might impact your performance later on in rotations and electives, and then in interviews as well. So you want to make sure that you don't fail anything, for example, because you've been so focused on other things like your CV, for example. In terms of like rotations, uh, probably the most important thing is your attitude and being eager to learn. Like what I say to med students, and I mean, I still feel like I was just a med student, to be honest. But what I say to med students is, you know, we just want to teach you, really. When I interact with the medical student, I just want to teach them because it's fun and it's beneficial to them and myself. So if like if you reciprocate teaching well and are eager to be taught and to sort of be present, then I think those are important, more so than your actual knowledge. A lot of the time when I ask med students questions or sort of knowledge testing questions, it's more just trying to discover what you don't know so that I can teach you, right? Like that's the goal in the end. And no matter what that starting point is, even if you think it's like that you have only a basic level of knowledge, it's fine, right? Because then we can work on that together. So that's my perspective as a resident. So just show up, be on time, be eager to learn, uh, view it as a learning experience. But yeah, just be eager to learn for sure.
Well, thank you.
So going off that, I guess, like if our listeners do take your advice and are eager to learn,
Mhm.
and show up to their clerkship electives, following what you said, if they do impress or they think they impress someone on their rotation, whether it be ophthalmology or not, what would be your advice for asking for reference letters? Because I know that's something that a lot of students are wondering about when they enter clerkship.
Yeah, it's a good question. So um, basic things. So ask in person, right? Don't email to ask. So that would be the first thing. One thing that people have different opinions on, and I'll give my opinion, is like asking towards the beginning or towards the end of a rotation. I always asked at the end of a rotation, but there are some people who will say maybe it's good to sort of set that like kind of understanding that that's what you're hoping for sort of thing. But I don't know. I always ask at the end of a rotation. And yeah, just ask in person, and if they'll write you a letter is really just all you have to do. Staff get asked it quite often, and if you get a feel that you had a pretty good like interaction with them, then that's good. Broadly about reference letters, of course, try to get them in ophthalmology, but there are other things that are also valuable, right? Like the relationship that you have with the person. So if you have a longer, more fruitful or more robust relationship with the staff, say like a research PI or something, then that's quite valuable because they can say more. They can say more like about what they know about you. So like if two of them are ophthalmology, that's probably fine. I can't get specifically because I haven't been on a committee, but of course more the better, but the relationship and what they can speak to is also important. So yeah, just ask straight up. Generally it's well received. If you feel like it's worth asking and you can ask on your end, it probably means that they're happy to do it. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I'm sure everyone will appreciate knowing all of that. I definitely I mean, I was confused about how I would go about the process, and it seems a lot more simple than we might think. So that's super helpful to know. Did you do any visiting electives, by the way? I mean, I know this year a lot of students aren't able to do that, but moving forward, hopefully it'll open back up. But do you have any advice for how you went about that, and for connecting with people outside of your home school and getting reference letters outside of people you're interacting with at your own school?
Hmm. Yeah, so I was in like what you would call a normal year, like the year before COVID. So, so I did a total of like we had 16 weeks of elective time, like overall, divided into 2 week blocks. So basically like 8 electives, and 4 of mine or 8 weeks of mine were in ophthalmology. You try to, you try to get like at least 4 or 5 or 6, but it's actually, even in a normal year, it's sort of difficult to secure them. And I'll talk about that. So yeah, I went to Manitoba, Queens, and U of T externally, and then I did one at Western. The majority of them, at least in a normal year, are just organized through the CFMS portal. So you'll learn about that at like the beginning of 4th year. It's basically like a centralized portal where you apply for electives, and just like cross your fingers and hope that there's a spot for you. The ones that are a little bit different, and I looked into this and I found the website. So for Toronto, you contact them directly. So there's a website called MedSys, so like medsis utoronto.ca/electives. And that basically lets you search by like department or whatever. So you search ophthalmology and gives you the contact information. And for Toronto, you basically just email. Usually it's like an administrative person, or in some cases it's the actual staff themselves, asking for an elective. In Toronto, of course, like asking a Toronto resident, you'd probably get more information, but sort of generally speaking, all of the main sites in Toronto, so St. Mike's, Toronto Western, Sick Kids, Toronto General, I think, they all have like residents and they all have ophthalmology. So you'll be able to get that interaction. But you might have to, while you're there, you might have to sort of ask if there's the ability to work in the resident clinic or be with residents on call. I was at Toronto Western Hospital with Dr. Alan Slomovic, who's the cornea staff, and yeah, it was good. Yeah, so I mean, I can only really speak to that, right? Like to the experience I had, but so it's largely the portal, and then Toronto is a little bit different, and yeah, try to just get what you can get. It's difficult even when they're fully available. I remember I got Queens off of a waiting list, and I was lucky because I had my laptop open with my email open when I got the email saying that there was one available. So I just like immediately clicked it. So it's a little bit hectic even in the best of times.
Yeah, no, that that sounds hectic. I'm a little stressed out, and
Yeah.
I'm years away. But thank
Yeah.
you for sharing to all our listeners. We can definitely give like the resources and the links that Jim just talked about, and so that you can all access them. So thank you for sharing those. A little bit now less about just like ophthalmology and going into the field in general. I think we hear a lot about like stress in medical school and stress in residency, and I think that's just like you even brought up burnout, and like it's a huge concern for us all. So I was wondering if you had any advice on like the best ways to manage stress in both residency and medical school, and like how you can keep up with these outside interests. Like I know you were really into music, so like keeping those hobbies, but while also being a great medical student, great clerk, great resident.
Hmm. Yeah, it's important, right? And I did briefly touch on it when I was talking about how it's a marathon and not a sprint, and that's part of it as well, especially in medical school with that end goal sort of in mind. The few things that I'll say, so especially in residency, hopefully I will continue to be able to manage my stress in PGY too, because it's apparently like the hardest year. But so the things that work for me. So first of all, you can't do it on your own, right? You need a support network. I'm really lucky because I have a small group of really good friends here who are also residents in Ottawa in other specialties. And we just, you can just talk about stuff, you can vent, and support one another. It's having like a support network of friends and family as well, I think is very important. One thing that I do, and you mentioned it, is my hobbies. So my relationship with music is more, instead of like trying to keep up with it and viewing it that way, it's a way that I manage stress actually, is just by playing music. So I think having something like that, which not everyone has, but a thing that you can do either like reading or exercise, I think is helpful just because you're not thinking about medicine while you're doing it, right? So that's a helpful way to take your mind off of it. And then the last thing, and this will become more relevant in your clinical years and in residency, and this got me through the harder PGY1 rotations, like medicine, for example, is just reminding yourself that you're helping people, right? Like when you're on rotations and you're doing clinical service, you're making a difference. You're helping patients, and just reminding yourself that that's why you're there, and that there are people, patients, and their families who are impacted by what you're doing, can sometimes be a way to just sort of ground yourself and remind yourself why you're there. And in times when the other things broke down, that was sort of the one thing I could go back to. So that's another thing. But we'll see how much this holds up when I become like 5 times as busy in the next year. But yeah, that's what I would say.
I'm sure that you'll do great and manage your time perfectly well. I mean, probably at times, maybe not, but I'm sure that you'll find the time to hopefully pick up your guitar and manage your stress that way. But your positive outlook, definitely very helpful for myself. So really appreciate all of that. So final-ish question, more so about this podcast itself and iCurriculum and why we're all here. But maybe you could speak a little bit about your involvement with iCurriculum and your passion for peer mentorship and giving back. You kind of touched on it by talking about how much you like teaching, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of iCurriculum, so I'm the resident ambassador, basically. So what I do is I suggest ideas for content, and I review content that's going to be put on iCurriculum, which is really geared towards like the med student interested in ophthalmology, or the generalist, right? The information that we want to disseminate to people who will be sort of a general practitioner as well. And I'm interested in it, yeah, just as you mentioned. So I have a ton of background teaching, but a big thing that I think is important is peer mentorship. So when I was in 3rd year of med school, there was a resident who was a couple of years ahead of me, who had just matched to ophthalmology, and we met and had coffee and just talked about a lot of the stuff that us 3 have talked about today. And that was really helpful, and just in a way that I hope what I'm saying can be helpful to the 2 of you and your listeners. And at the end of that conversation, they said, just pay it forward, right? When I was like profusely thanking them and everything, right? So they were like, so pay it forward, and that's true. We need to help each other out, even when you advance to the next stage. Remember that you were just there, right? You were just the person who's stressed about applying to things. And so iCurriculum, I would say, is one way that I have that ability to do that. This type of podcast, where a lot of the things that I say to med students when I have one-on-one meetings can hopefully be heard by a lot of people. But also I do my best whenever people ask, to help them with applications. I read a bunch of personal statements and CVs, for example, for med students that just applied, and having Zoom calls and things like this. It was easier to do in PGY1. Hopefully I'll be able to still do it within reason, but yeah, paying it forward, I think is important. Peer mentorship has value that you can't really find anywhere else. So yeah, that's my perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. Like, first of all, thank you for being our incredible resident ambassador, but
Yeah,
also
exactly.
thank you for coming onto our podcast, sharing all this incredible information with us. It's incredible, and hopefully one day, Emaan and I will also both be able to pay it forward. Well, not hopefully, we definitely will.
Exactly. That's the mentality to have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now, just to finish off, so we're done with asking all the questions about ophthalmology and the field, but we like to end just to get to know you a little bit better. And so we're gonna ask you two would you rather questions. And yeah, I'm gonna just begin and go for it. So, would you rather never eat your favorite food for the rest of your life, or always eat your favorite food for the rest of your life?
Okay, this one's easy. So I would say always eat my favorite food, and it's because that's basically what I do. Like I've pretty much determined what I eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I'm such a boring person that I just constantly make the same things with very little variation. I guess I wouldn't say it's my favorite food because my favorite food is probably sushi, which I don't make. That maybe I can learn, but I'm the kind of person, if someone was like, Jim, you have to eat the same thing every day, I'd be like, oh well, I already do that. So so that's what I would say for that one.
No, that makes sense. And then you get to enjoy it every single day.
Exactly. Yeah.
So our next question, um, would you rather go to space for a week or stay in a week-long hotel at the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, that's actually kind of hard because
It-
I both of those are awesome.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm gonna say space. I think I'm gonna say space. Um, I'm pretty nerdy about like both of those two things. Like I'm a big Blue Planet guy. The documentaries.
Yeah,
But at the same time, space. I mean, where else are you gonna get that, right? Like you literally like look out a window and all of Earth is just floating beside you. That's pretty crazy. So um, I would probably go with space. You can do experiments with zero gravity and all these types of things. I feel like that would give you a different perspective as well. I know, for example, Chris Hadfield always talks about that, where he's like, when you actually see Earth just from the outside, it gives you a different perspective and makes you realize that um, life's bigger, I guess, type of thing. So yeah, I would probably go with space, although that's not super easy because of how cool I think the ocean is. Yeah.
I definitely think I was gonna go with the bottom of the ocean before I asked you that, but your answer made me lean more towards space now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. I was thinking like you could scuba dive and get to the bottom, like close to the bottom of the ocean, but like when are you really gonna go up
Mhm.
to space?
That's true. Yeah. I pride myself on being convincing. I think I've convinced a lot of people to do ophthalmology. So so there you go. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
our
And that
listeners are convinced.
yeah. And that's a good point about scuba diving too. That's a pretty good proxy, right? You'd probably be able to do that. So yeah,
Right.
that's a good one though. Thought
Excellent
provoking.
approach. Yeah. Well, anyways, thank you so much for sharing all of that information and for even answering some of our ridiculous would you rathers. And to all our listeners and to everyone watching or listening to this, thank you so much for coming back and joining us for our third episode of Seeing Clearly, which again is our pre-clerkship guide to all things ophthalmology. And for our listeners, if you want to stay caught up with everything else relating to iCurriculum, as you know, Dr. Jim Denstedt is also our resident advisor. So be sure to check our website out at www.icurriculum.com and follow us on Instagram at iCurriculum.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you to everyone that was listening. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Nice talking to you.